Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of FFS, where Asta and I discuss all the thoughts that keep us up at night and make us giggle during the day. I'm Vishrita, logging in from Houston, Texas.
And I'm Asa logging in from Chandigarh, India. So let's get all caught up for friendship's sake.
Yep. So I've been sick this week, so please bear with my weirdo voice. But how has your week been, Asta?
This week has actually been quite interesting for me because it marks my sort of return to work after 6 months, I think. So I started working this week, and as much as I was excited about it, I was also really anxious. So the week before that just went in, dealing with all of those emotions. But some interesting thoughts did pop up as they do. In the 6 to 7 months, right, that I was sort of at home and readjusting the life, or rather adjusting to a new version of my life. A lot of people, of course, ask me, "Oh, what do you do, or what are you doing now?" And I tell them that, "Hey, I'm on a break. I've taken a sabbatical, and I plan to rejoin in a few months once I find something I like." And you will not believe the absolute myriad of opinions that I got, of thoughts that were shared with me, and some of them were polarizing. So I think the spectrum went from, "Oh, that's so great. I hope you enjoy your break. This I'm sure there's a lot going on in your life. You deserve it. You should take a break." To the other end, which was, "Really? You're going to sit at home? Like, what do you need to do? How can you sit at home?" And both sides saw me react in a very different way. And after that conversation got over, and after I was done defending my uh, decision, I always, for the next few hours, or sometimes even a day or two, found myself questioning the decision I made, or feeling really good about it, depending on which way the discussion has gone. And this didn't just happen externally. Sometimes it even happened internally, where I just woke up one day and I'm like, "What am I doing with my life? What's happening? I don't recognize this version of my life." So that made me realize how much perspective really matters, and the fact that there is no right perspective. Like, there cannot be. It's not a black and white. There cannot be a right and a wrong. And this just made me realize that while there can be two extremes to any thought or any topic, there's such a broad spectrum in the middle that is very nuanced, sorry, and is every person can, your perspective can matter just by 10% or 20%. But that 10 or 20% is very important, and it's shaped by whatever your personal life and journey and learnings and beliefs have been, but also how easy it is to get affected by someone else's perspective if you're not careful.
No, I agree. I feel like as you started off with this whole career conversation, right? Even for me, I'm someone I feel like I put a lot of focus on my career in terms of how it shapes my identity. I don't think that's the right thing to do,
Oh
but I
God, yeah.
definitely do that, right? So even for me, like when I knew that you were taking a break, I didn't know how to process it, and I've always
Yeah.
struggled with it in the sense that it's just this thought of like well, you could do so much more. I know you're capable of this and all of that, and
Yeah.
and we kind of spoke about it when initially. So
Yeah.
I think there are two ways that like this conversation could have gone. I could have come at you and told you that no, this is not the right thing to
Not
do.
right. Yeah.
um Versus like what we actually had, which was an open discourse where I was just like, how do you feel about it, and do you think you're like mentally happy about doing this and things like that. So I just think when people do not understand or do not know how to see through the other lens.
Yeah.
One, it could be like complete lack of knowledge because they just have not ever been put in that spot.
Yeah.
Or it could be the fact that I know there's another perspective that exists, but I choose to ignore it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the other perspective just makes so much sense to me. I'm just going to stick to that and ignore the fact that there are other
Yeah.
people with other problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just that, it's also the idea that how much do you really know to have made or to have built that perspective that you're talking about? For
Mhm.
example, for the longest time, I used to believe that your education cannot be marked as complete until you at least have a master's degree,
Mhm.
because that was what I was taught throughout. Both my parents are professionals. My dad's an engineer, my mom's a chartered accountant. So I was always taught that education is is paramount and it's very important and etc. etc. And I mean that's what I ended up doing, right? We ended up going for a master's. But
Yeah.
when Webber was when we first met, he had dreams of going to the US for a master's as well. And I think that sort of became a bonding point for us.
Vaibhav is
And
Asta's
then
husband for everyone who
yeah,
doesn't know.
yeah. But a few years into it, for reasons completely not relevant here, but he decided that he's not going to go for his
Mhm.
master's. And actually, I'm wrong to say that reasons are not relevant because they're very relevant. Um, and I was for a second stunned. Like,
Yeah.
how can you not? Like, huh? And it took me a lot of time to accept that, okay, I'm going to be with somebody who doesn't have a master's, because it was so monumental in my head
Mm.
that you have to have it. That the fact that my own partner was choosing not to do it was bizarre to me. But here's why I said the reasons matter. He chose not to do it to support his father because his father was having a health crisis.
Yeah.
Now, if I don't take a moment to understand his thought process, to ask him, why are you doing what you're doing, and simply stick to my perspective, I don't even think that's ignorance or lack of knowledge. It's like a combination of the two. Like
Yeah.
you're choosing to not ask questions that'll help you. I'm not saying you have to change, I have to change my perspective. I still think a master's is important.
Hmm.
But for me, right, I think so that recognizing the factors that affect your perspective and the factors that affect somebody else's, I think are so important to
Yeah.
just,
This
lights.
actually reminds me of this one article I was reading recently. And I don't know, it just left a very lasting impact in me. Um, you know how there are like pre-cut vegetables, right?
Yeah.
Or like meal kits or a lot
Yeah.
of these kind of ready to cook
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff that I've heard people criticize it a lot, right? And even
Okay.
for me, I feel like I fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum where I would be like, sometimes I would get like cut vegetables, but I'd be like, oh, why do you need to pick up like a one of these like ready-made sambar kits where they have like a little bit of dal, a little bit of vegetables, and all of that. I'm like, you can have all of it at home. It's a waste of money. They're just like, you're spending extra wastefully and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But so I was reading this article about how this whole concept of pre-cut vegetables came into play. Of course, there is a convenience factor to it, but convenience doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. There are people out there like, so this was actually this I came across this article on a Reddit thread, and then I was reading the comments, and there were so many people who talked about how their parents have like either have aged and they cannot anymore like hold a knife without hurting themselves, or have like mental health issues where they have trauma and cannot hold a knife, cannot look at a knife,
Yeah.
not safe with a knife inside the house. um,
Yeah.
and and especially in countries like the US, and it's becoming common elsewhere also, where it's like hyper independent, people live by themselves irrespective of their conditions. They have to make meals for themselves, right? So we always think of it from a perspective of, oh, for me it's just a time factor,
Hmm.
you
Or
know,
a money factor.
or a money factor. There are other people who actually need it, and I felt like, as much as it made complete sense after I read that thread, I've never thought about it,
Yeah.
right? For simply because I didn't have to, I guess. And that made me really think about, brought me back to the idea of privilege, right? The privilege of not having to think about things, the privilege of
Absolutely.
uh, taking things for granted. So I think that again plays a huge role, and it makes a difference in,
100%.
if you're truly only taking privilege for granted even after you come to know of these things, or are you like acknowledging your privilege and are curious to understand what other people, go through, and what is
Yeah.
the lens they look at these things.
Yeah. Privilege always is looked at it as a negative thing. I've never heard someone talk about privilege positively, and unless you're talking about like gratitude journals and people who do that kind of stuff, that's a different ballgame. But I've always seen, and that's been thrown at me a lot of times in fact, even at work, I've been told things like, I mean, you don't need the money right now, you don't have to run your house. But that's not the point. Like,
Yeah.
or oh, you wouldn't know because you're so privileged, so you won't work hard. Huh? Where does that come from? And very often that clout of privilege or the bias towards privilege has been used against me.
Mm.
And at the same time, there have been times that I have used my privilege without realizing
Mm-hmm.
to my advantage, even in situations where I didn't really need to,
Yeah.
right? But having said that, I've made a conscious effort in the last few years, since actually learning about the concept and what it entails, that if I've been given 10 of something, I want to use my privilege to make it 100 and then help others.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that's something as simple as picking an orphanage to donate to whenever I have a little extra money. Or not just that, say something good happens in my life, I'll donate a little bit of money.
Yeah. No, first I want to address the whole thing that you brought up with, how privilege is used to not recognize merit.
Yeah,
That's not how things work. Like, you have to start with hiring, establish equity while hiring, establish equity in giving people opportunities.
absolutely.
um don't, once you've hired and people are working, it doesn't matter, right? Like, after that point, like, give credit where it's due. I recently heard an executive talking about, like, boardroom conversations that she's been part of, where they've, like, said things like, oh, we don't have to promote this female manager because her husband is a lawyer and makes enough money, right? And that just doesn't make any sense, like, because, you this is a merit based system inside that office, right? That's how your company is working. So,
Yeah,
and it made me really think about how, what you share within a company makes a difference. What you talk about your family, do you have to
absolutely.
go around telling people that, I'm struggling for money to get a promotion? That's not how it should be. Um but the other thing that you said about, privilege being talked about positively, I agree. I feel like, and it makes sense that most of what it's being talked about is talked about negatively, because there's a lot of people who misuse privilege, and there is a lot of oppression for people who don't have that privilege, be it in the social hierarchy, the economic hierarchy, whatever it is.
Yeah,
um, but you're right. I think, privilege doesn't stop with just acknowledging it. You have to
No.
use it for good for your
Yeah.
own self and for others.
Yeah.
um, which is not easy at all, which I definitely would say it's not easy, but I think
Yeah.
it's so important for a lot of us to learn. And it's
Yeah.
not just about money, right? Like education is a privilege. Having a good family that you can lean back on is a privilege. So
Absolutely.
I'm not saying you have to go about every day thinking about the fact that oh, I'm privileged, so I have to feel guilty about it. No, that's
Yeah, it's not a bad thing. I mean,
yeah,
it's absolutely not a bad thing. There has been someone before you who's like, for example, our parents have worked really hard to give us what they have, and they gave us more than what they have.
yeah,
And the idea is you continue along that path. You don't stagnate there.
yeah. But I think and again I feel like there is a lack of credit given to people who use their privilege well, because there's a disproportionate amount of people
Yeah,
not using it
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Which yeah.
I'm just thinking of ways that people like you and me who are fairly privileged
Mm-hmm.
can use their privilege for sort of the greater good. And I don't have a lot of examples except you doing some sort of charity or, that kind
No,
of
I
stuff.
think paying it forward in whatever means you can, right?
Yeah,
I feel like there's a lot of mentorship, advocacy that can happen. Like even like whatever it is, being able to
yeah,
stand up for the right thing, just go out, participate in a parade or protest or whatever it is. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. That's the different ways I think I've been able to do it.
for
um
sure.
I think one thing that we cannot not address is duality within politics, right? And this is something I personally like, and I would love to know how you feel about it. I struggle with it because I think for me, say I have a certain political belief, and it's not easy for me to like have like a sit down conversation with someone who's the other extreme, right?
Yeah.
As much as I would like to say that I know I'm a curious person otherwise, and I love playing devil's advocate and picking people's brains about things that they believe differently. This is one that like really like I feel like I strongly believe in certain things, so it makes it harder for me to have these conversations. Like how do you deal with it? Do you feel the same way?
Mm, yes, is the easy answer to give. That I do feel the same way because I do. However, I do struggle very greatly with um, trying to reason with people who believe differently than I do
Hmm.
on very fundamental topics. You and I can have opposing views on a economic policy, for example, okay?
Mhm.
And I'm willing to hear you out and discuss it.
Mhm.
But we cannot have opposing views on basic rights to life. Like that's just something that I find myself getting so triggered by that I can't go forward with a conversation if someone says uh, differently.
Yeah.
I've had some very, very heated conversations with friends
Mm.
where, we've been completely, I don't want to go into the exact details of it here, but where I've spent hours
Yeah.
just asking why, why.
Yeah.
What I realized eventually is that again it came down to the fact that the person I was talking to was male,
Mhm.
was Hindu, came from a good family, so well to do economically, and was heterosexual.
Mhm.
So much of just who he was the majority, was the normal, as they call it, that it was impossible for me to try and show him or explain to him whatever it is that I have learned from my peers who don't necessarily think like the normal, air quotes, or normal.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because sometimes you can tell that it is a sheer lack of exposure, right? They've
Yeah,
just not seen differently at all. Um,
absolutely.
I've heard someone say caste doesn't exist in India, and it still blows my mind. And it I don't know. I mean, I guess it comes from, if that's the level of privilege, right? You've not been exposed to not just discrimination that was against you, but this sheer knowledge of knowing that, that happens across the country, which was like glaring to me. But I also think, in most cases, it's either ignorance, where I'm just like, where people are like, it doesn't affect me, so I'm not going to read about it or, learn about it. Or,
Yeah.
I don't know, like sometimes I feel like exposure and education would help, but sometimes I guess it doesn't. And,
I don't think education helps. I'm sorry, I know this because think about what we're taught in school, Vish. Think about it. We're taught about um, geometry, algebra. We're
yeah,
taught
but
about basic. We're
that's
taught what's written in the preamble, but
yeah.
we are not taught about anything to do with human psychology. We're not taught about anything to do with, say, sexuality. We're not taught about economics the way that it's practiced.
Hmm.
So I this person, and I'll tell you, they're educated, man, like very well educated, and I still could not reason with him.
Yeah. And I guess they just do not put the focus on things that, like, even if, like, for example, for me, I feel like a lot of like the social evils of, our society was taught to me in social science. That's where I probably like first came across it, again, simply because I'm privileged enough to not have to go through a lot of it in my real life.
Yeah.
um and I guess some people just like look at it, like just from a point of view of, oh, this is like history, or it happens in a,
It's in the textbook.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it happens in an alien land, which, I do not relate to. So
Yeah.
that's fair. And I
In
understand,
fact,
and I acknowledge the fact that it's not taught in a way that leaves an impact and tells
yeah.
people that, like, this is life around you.
Yeah, in fact, you said this one statement right now that said in an alien land.
Hmm.
There, before I went to America, so many times I've heard things like, "Oh, this only happens in India." People abroad don't do XYZ. I went there and I'm like, no,
Yeah.
that's not true. So much that we hear and that we read and that we're told or not is like we live in, even though the world is so connected, the world is, everything is at your fingertips thanks to the internet, etc. But you still know very, 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 very little. Even if you spend all day on social media, it is an algorithm. It's going to show you more of what you like,
Yeah.
and hence not going to expose you to other viewpoints unless you actively try to, you know, broaden your horizon, or you
Oh,
actively try to read things that are, or speak to people or follow people that think differently than you do.
yeah.
You are going to be in this small little bubble. How many people will you know? 100 people, 200 people,
Yeah.
1,000 people.
It is
But
an echo chamber, right? Like it just
yeah,
create, and in fact, like someone recently was telling me about how they only follow people whose viewpoints are different from theirs,
yeah,
so that they just like get all this and like can understand where they're coming from. So I was like, that's interesting. And I
yeah.
went and followed like a bunch of people who I don't particularly agree with. And my first thought was, okay, what if someone stalks me and thinks like, and the second thing was obviously it's triggering, right? I want to bring it back to that, like that triggers you, that like, and it's not just on social media, like it happens within, your family setting. Like there are so many conversations,
Yeah,
oh my god, um that has, like I don't know, there are debates, then you want to argue it out, then that leads to like
Storm
friction
offs.
and um I mean, more often than not, like this again, like you come back to the fact that okay, your family, but sometimes it also feels weird because you're just like, oh, I'm trying to like do something outside in the society and like see if I can change the perspective or mindset of one person outside while I'm not able to
If
do it
I do
inside.
it at home.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
like kind of puts you off. And but I think I want to kind of bring it back because the point of today's conversation is just like how do you deal with these triggers? How do you have a conversation without judgment? Like it's not
Can
easy.
I tell you something?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think judgment is bad.
Mm.
How you What you do with that judgment can be good or bad, but
Mm.
I don't think judgment is bad.
Mm.
How else are you going to um, choose? How else are you going to protect yourself from certain situations if you don't judge the
Yeah.
situation? If you don't judge the person, how are you going to know whether or not you want that person in your life? Whether I take, if my judgment about that person is bad and then I go on a full hate spiel, that's a different
Mm.
way of dealing with it. But I don't think judgment particularly is a bad thing.
Yeah.
You have to have it, and a good one, hopefully.
Yeah.
Um, but say if I, like you said, if there's say it it happens all the time where say I'm having a conversation with the elders of the family and we don't agree on a political or an economic or a social
Yeah.
topic, it inevitably leads to either someone saying, okay, now let's just change the topic, it's fine. Or it leads to one party storming off,
Mm.
saying you don't understand anything. And very often it comes down to you have not seen the world as much as
Yeah.
we have. And the
Like
thing is, this is something I've actually said, yeah, but the world you've seen and the world I'm seeing are different. We are seeing different worlds. And let's talk about today. But
no,
fortunately or
sorry to stop
unfortunately,
you
this
there. Sorry to stop you there, but I just feel like that is what I mean by judgment, right? Like, basically, judgment is bad when it stops you from listening further. When it
yeah,
stops
exactly.
from like,
Exactly.
yeah, when they just say,
Yeah, if you take your judgment and be like what I think is final
yeah,
and what I think is the epitome of truth, then no one can help you.
yeah,
And the thing is, I don't know if this is the right way to do it. Probably not. But I've given up on trying to rationalize. I don't know if that's the right word, but I've given up on trying to change the minds of people who wouldn't listen to voice of reason. I don't want to engage in a one-sided conversation where I'm shouting my lungs out at you and you are not willing to listen.
yeah,
I'd rather devote that energy towards somebody who is willing to have an active conversation. Then even if that person doesn't change their mindset,
mhm,
at least I've engaged in a meaningful conversation and I've tried.
yeah,
So after a point, I don't think you can change someone. Like you just there's so many voices out there speaking to this one person. You can't be the loudest. And also then again, it's going to be controversial, but I can't fight with my family beyond a point.
mm,
Like I can't continue to I might not agree with them on 100 things,
yeah.
but I can't be like, okay, I'm gonna cut off from you because I don't agree with you unless they do something very like problematic. But after a point, I can't because they're also trying to change my mind. And
Yeah,
this is not just for political stuff, even for other things like save how much money to save, where to save your money, like everywhere. Like I don't know, maybe I'm not strong enough to do it, but I can't beyond the point engage in a one-sided conversation.
because I think it is the hardest, right? Because there are so many other dependencies, and then on top of that, you love them. So I guess that makes a difference. But I think for me, I've yes, it's so important to like know who's arguing for the sake of arguing and who's really
Yeah.
arguing to like understand, right?
You know what I started doing? I stopped arguing and I just started asking questions. Okay, do
Yeah,
you think so? Why do you think so?
yeah,
You think this is bad. Okay, why do you think this is bad? And sometimes magically.
Way to go about it, because I feel like unless it just comes from intent. If their intent is also to understand and listen and explain, well and good,
Exactly.
like go for it, right? Otherwise, like you said, it is, like just, better for you in terms of
Yeah.
your mental health to just avoid some of these
Yeah.
conversations. As much as I am someone who fully believes it's important to, like, every voice matters and it's important to, like, make noise, um sometimes you also need to protect your own mental health. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, moving away from politics, right? Like, how do you think about this whole concept of duality, like, within yourself, in terms of, perspective, and in terms of,
Mm,
sometimes you find yourself responding to things in a contradicting manner,
yeah.
um from, like, for different situations, basically. So
Yeah.
how do you think about that? Because sometimes it makes me question my sense of self.
This topic is the reason I wanted to talk about this topic, but this is also the part of the topic that I don't want to talk about. I think so. In the At least in the past few, I think a year and a half, I started, especially since I started going to therapy. I think I've started working really, really hard on my internal dialogue.
Yeah.
I started to really be honest with myself before anyone else, and internally know or ask myself questions
Mm.
that solidify or break down
Yeah.
a particular perspective that I have. And going to be honest with you, that changes. Every time I have a new interaction, my perspective shifts a little. It might shift back, but it
Mhm.
shifts a little.
Mhm.
And what I try to do is to talk myself into looking at the more positive way of judging a
Yeah.
situation. Now, it could be something that I'm not actually feeling positive about, but I would try to give a spin on it and be like, okay, maybe this is a positive situation. Or if I'm just unable to do it, I'll be like, okay, how do I get out of this situation and go into the positive side?
Right.
Like, how do I get myself out of it? But I think even then, there are times where I react to situations in the complete opposite way that I would have liked to.
Mm.
And I feel horrible about it. I will try,
Yeah.
but there is a recourse to go back and say, hey, I didn't want to do that, and either apologize or change my stance or whatever it is. So yeah, I try and have some, if a recourse is possible, I'll do that. Or I will just go back and ask questions, like internally to myself, to others that share a different opinion. I think the only way we can know better is to ask why.
Yeah. And
And
I
then you can choose not to change your opinion. That's fine.
Yeah, but I don't know. Go watch Inside Out too, guys. I
I
mean,
know. Oh my God. Yes.
I think for me, it was really, really, like, validating and heartwarming to see that
Yeah.
whole idea of sense of self. Um where, towards the end, like, I didn't see it coming, because it's almost like you hold on to this super positive sense of self and start thinking that that is you, while this is also you, that is also you, and everything else is also you, everything you've done is you, and that doesn't
Yeah.
make you bad.
Yeah.
Right. So I think for me, in some ways, as much as it is positive enforcement, I've heard it a lot where people tell me that I have a strong sense of self. So I think subconsciously, I've also tried to hold on to it really, like, strongly, that, when I do something that's remotely different from what I think I would react, or like how I would react to a certain situation, then I start blaming myself for it, right? But then I think the movie, and just, like, generally me thinking about things over the last couple of weeks, taught me this whole idea of, like, multiple realities. We, like, a lot of the times our response is just a response to a stimuli. Like,
Yeah.
um and you cannot control it always. Yes, you have to be as kind and positive, and considerate as possible, but even to yourself, it's not always possible to be the perfect person.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I feel like there are certain things that are not just responses to what is happening at that moment. There's so much that you have within that comes out. So
Yeah.
as much as addressing all of that is important, accepting is also important,
Yeah. I
right?
think
Mhm.
you said multiple realities, right? When I learned this concept, it's a really funny and
Yeah.
random thing, but I learned it in a strategic marketing class in
Mhm.
Northwestern.
Mhm.
Then we were given these case studies
Yeah.
and we were told to find our own stance and then defend it. And nobody was marked as right or wrong. And that was very surprising to me because all through my academic journey, that I have been taught that there is a right answer and a wrong answer.
Mm.
And if you want to be partially right, these are the criteria. It's
Yeah.
always been so defined
Mm.
that the idea that something could be right, but I could choose not to want to do it,
Yeah.
was completely alien to me.
I remember you telling me this then.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, like you, and I think that questions your self of sense so strongly. And I think that's also where self of sense, sorry, sense of self comes from, where you find something that you believe in and then you protect it, you defend it, but you don't offend someone else's sense of self in defending your own. There is a difference between acceptance and tolerance on, most, not on human rights. There is not tolerant acceptance there, but there
Yeah.
still is a need to accept other people's viewpoints and be flexible with tweaking your own somewhere.
Yeah. No, I get reminded of this story from like when I was really small when we talk about acceptance and tolerance, right? So I think um my like first international trip was when I was, I don't remember, maybe like third grade, fourth grade, sometime around then. And we went to Singapore. And so it was me, my brother, and my parents. And I remember like initially the first, so my dad's rule with traveling, which I still strongly stand by, is always use public transportation because that's how you learn the city, or walk.
Yeah.
Two,
Mm-hmm.
no Indian food. uh so- and I'm vegetarian. At that point, at least, I've never like come across meat being cooked or eaten, and like also,
Yeah.
um, it's different how people in Singapore or people outside in like maybe I would have come across meat being cooked Indian style a little bit here
Yeah.
and there. So when we were walking across like the food court or when we go get food, um I couldn't take the smell of fish oil. I couldn't take the smell
Yeah.
of like half cooked meat and all of that. And so my dad did this thing where he would be like, even if we're crossing a mall and we don't have to necessarily go eat, every time we did that, or every time there was a chance for us to walk through a place where different people from different ethnic backgrounds are having different kind of food, my dad would make me walk through that food court. And I was like, why you make me do this? I cannot take it. And he said, you need to accept the fact that that is food. That's just somebody else's food, and that you cannot make faces. And I
Yeah.
was like, but it's not like I'm going and telling them not to eat. I just don't want to be able to. I just don't want to stand there, right? And he was like, no, I want you to be able to stand there. You can have your own food. They can have their own food, but however close you are, you cannot make faces. You have to accept
Yeah.
the fact that that is their food and this is your food, right?
Yeah.
um and that I think is tolerance versus acceptance, right? Me saying, like, I'm not doing anything to them, I'll just walk away, is me saying I'll tolerate the fact that they eat whatever they want to eat,
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
me being able to sit down on a table with them, appreciate the fact that that's a different cuisine, different food. This is
Yeah,
and I know I've come a long way from there, but I think that is a lesson for life, that I
absolutely.
still hold very close to. Yeah.
Then in everyday situations, it is so important to understand where the other person's coming from and then find a common ground. For you,
Yeah.
the common ground would be okay, sit and eat. You eat your food, I'll eat my food. They don't have to be on the same page,
Yeah.
right? Listening why that person doesn't like what they don't like why is that person eating what that person's eating? Why is that person making a decision that they're making? And to truly, instead of listening for ways to counter them and to challenge them, just listen to understand
Yeah.
where they are coming from. And
Yeah.
you'll automatically find the common ground somewhere. You'll find some, you know, insights that will tell you, okay, this one point we match on. Let's do something there.
I agree. And I think staying curious always helps.
Yeah,
Because then you're asking questions, but you're also trying to look at life from their perspective, trying to like be on their shoes and
yeah,
figure what it feels like. So again, not easy. We
absolutely.
are like, learning every day how to do it. And
Absolutely.
like you said, it makes a difference from like workplace situations to workplace conflicts to understanding like everyday family situations to
Yep.
larger things that we'd spoken about, like politics and society and
In
things
fact,
like
not just this episode, if you remember the episode we did on like money and how
that.
to manage like career and all of
Yeah.
that, it,
Yeah.
we I think we touched upon this even then.
Yeah.
And I remember us talking about how important it is to remember that it's not a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
You you could have a perspective that applies to you that could also apply to a lot of other people, but don't forget that it might not apply to some others.
Yeah.
And just like it's just remember it's not universal. Nothing's universal. And I read this somewhere or somebody told me, I can't remember. But they said that everybody who's saying something
Mm-hmm.
thinks that what they are saying is rational
Mm-hmm.
because in their head they're able to rationalize it.
Yeah. And
And
that's what like everybody's like banking on to polarize people, right? There's so much
yeah,
polarization, there's so much conflict across the world, micro, macro, all levels of conflict. And
absolutely.
I don't know, recently I've been feeling like it's so important to not give in to this polarization. Understand it's a spectrum, understand that it is never us versus them, never, with anyone,
Yeah,
right? It is you versus maybe beyond you. So I guess that's where you
yeah,
you see the difference of what you know versus what you don't, and
yeah.
don't jump to conclusions, but rather like try and understand where someone else is coming from.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a thing like conclusion exists when we talk about perspectives because they are ever changing,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's great, actually. That's absolutely fantastic. If you have the power or if you have the just internal strength
Mm.
to constantly be open to learning more and changing your perspective, that's great. I mean, isn't that growth?
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I think this conversation has been we started with saying duality and everything, but we really went um wide and far in this
Mhm.
conversation. But I really hope that whoever's listening finds an iota of
Yeah.
logic in this. And yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was a
It
interesting
was great.
conversation.
Yeah. I want to end it by I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing this t-shirt which kind of reads, it's a really old Tamil saying that reads Yadu Mure Yavarum Kelir, which translates to everybody listen, everywhere is home. And I think said thousands of years ago, um,
It holds true.
holds true, right? Like it nothing like seeing a piece of home in every other person you meet and trying to
Yeah,
understand what this world and perspective means to them. So, yep, we leave
absolutely.
you with that note. Hope you have
See
a
you.
week or
Yeah,
couple of weeks before we
absolutely.
meet you again.
Yes, see you next time.
Bye. Thank
Bye.